Welcome to the France debate. Guests here already discussing the issue, and there are such issues to discuss. I'm Mark Owen in Paris. Emmanuel Macron's in Washington meeting with Donald Trump, and we can show you now his jet as they're preparing for his arrival. They've got the landed, well, the carpet's coming out, as you can see, at the Andrews Air Base. The steps are in place, and we're waiting for the French president and his wife to set foot on American soil. This is the first state visit under the Trump administration. We had told the two men get on very well. There's even talk of a bromance, to use that word to describe how two guys get along together and really appreciate one another. But we wonder how that translates into diplomatic language when there are big issues that perhaps they don't see eye to eye on. We're going to discuss all of that. Our guests, Anne Dessine, who's professor at the University Paris-West Nanterre. Thank you for being with us. Anne is also a US legal and political issues expert, as you will see. On the other side of our studio, they're not necessarily against. It's not like that here. Mark Porter, President of Republicans Overseas France. Great to see you, sir. How are you?
Thank you. Very good. Excellent. Thank you.
Looking forward to hearing your points of view. In the studio, also, we have Stephen Ekovich, who is from the American University in Paris. Regular visitor to our shores. Good to see you again.
Always good to be here.
A professor of politics and history. Good to see you, sir. And joining us from Washington, D.C., is John Christopher Boer, who's White House correspondent of Talk Media. There he is, yes, looking very serious and ready to go. John Christopher, good to see you, sir. We're just going back to see the shots from the airbase where the aircraft has landed. And as we're looking at these shots, maybe we'll show them to you very shortly. Let's bring in our guests to talk a little bit about the situation regarding Trump meeting Macron. And I'll give you first bite at this one. These guys get on. Is that going to matter? Is that going to make a difference?
I think it's going to matter, but not necessarily make a difference. There are issues, but there are mostly differences. I mean, they disagree on almost everything that's going to be discussed during the 3 days. One being the Iranian agreement, the other one is being Syria, and of course the trade, the tariffs negotiation. So I think what's important is that they get on well together, that they can exchange ideas. And I think this is how the relationship worked from the beginning. The fact that Macron was able to establish some kind of rapport with Donald Trump, I think the American president, in a way, is bluffed. He has respect for this young guy coming out of nowhere. Not quite true, but that's probably how he sees it. And he's very happy that Macron, instead of treating him like Angela Merkel, is treating him with respect, politely, and tries to have dialogues with him. And at the end of the game, if we look at the symbols, all the symbols during the visit, Mount Vernon, the oak tree, Macron is bringing a tree for Trump, which is funny because we're not going to discuss the climate, but anyway.
Oh, we are. We can discuss anything you like.
No. I mean, they are not. I mean, you see, yesterday in the Fox News interview, the climate had disappeared. So I don't think it's going to be at the top of the agenda. What will remain is the long-lasting friendship. The first friendship, Mount Vernon, George Washington's house, the first president of the U.S., the general who had contact with Lafayette, etc. So it's history and the long-standing friendship. And again, in the interview yesterday, Macron on several occasions mentioned the allies. And he says, you need allies. You can't go on your own. And he mentioned that for Iran. And so I think, yes, I think it's going to go very well. There won't be any crisis. And maybe we'll have some results.
And as you're talking, I can sense the guys itching to get in. Mark, I'll bring you in next. I mean, don't hesitate. You've got something to say. Please just jump in and I'll just try and separate the voices so everyone gets heard. But Mark, this aspect of Macron somehow being the phrase I saw was the Trump whisperer. He's able to sort of whisper in his ear and make things happen or somehow get through to him. Do you see any, do you agree with that?
I don't know, but I've never heard it on the other side of the Atlantic. I've only heard it on this side, so that must mean something. I think Anne's actually right that it's going to be a great time. I mean, this is a time for celebration. Trump is an excellent negotiator, and he's also very good at hosting people. It's not the first state visit, as you said, it's the first state dinner. So that is a slight difference because Trump wanted to wait a year before having the first state dinner. But the idea that Trump and his wife are extremely good hosts, and this should be an excellent celebration.
Indeed. And you know the menu of the food. Let's get that out of the way, yeah?
I do, yes. The menu will have, for the first course.
And this is at
goat's
George
cheese-
Washington's house. I mean, which is obviously impressive, isn't it? I mean, you know.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yes, Mount Vernon. The first course is goat cheese gâteau, tomato jam, buttermilk biscuit crumbles, and young variegated lettuces. For the main course, rack of lamb, burnt cipollini soubise, Carolina gold rice jambalaya, and for dessert, nicotine tart and creme fraiche with ice cream.
Mark, thank you very much. I am salivating.
And no wine, I suppose.
Absolutely
no wine
salivating.
for Donald Trump. But there
Because
may
Trump
be
doesn't drink, does he? So he doesn't drink alcohol. No.
Diet Coke.
Yes. Well, actually, it's Melania. It's the wife's president, the first lady, who is in charge of the menu and all of these types of things. So,
Stephen,
But that explains its elegance then.
over to you, sir.
oh,
Don't be nasty.
that was nasty.
No, I think in general we shouldn't put too much weight on personal chemistry. There are institutions,
Okay.
and there are long-term relations that are strong. Long-term trade and investment. There's growing interdependence of both the French economy and the American economy. There are a few other differences. I don't think that Donald Trump's going to move on the Paris Accord. Maybe the French president will get him to prolong the Iran Accord. That's a possibility, because it's a possibility because the American military wants it. The generals want it. So if Macron can add his voice to the voice of Mattis and the generals, it might make a difference there. France for a long time, and Macron's no exception here, prefers to work through multilateral institutions. Macron is a very staunch defender of the European Union.
Yeah.
He wants to keep it together. Donald Trump has been in favor of, in some sense, breaking it up. He was in favor of Brexit. So we have two different fundamental approaches to international politics here. One president, Donald Trump, who largely wants to go it alone, is more unilateralist and even to some set isolationist. The French president carrying on a French tradition of being more multilateral and putting a strong emphasis on European institutions.
Stephen,
and NATO.
As you're speaking to us, we can see Brigitte Macron emerging, dressed in pink. There we go. And Emmanuel Macron, there he is. So this is now official. They've landed, which is obviously great news. They're all safe and on the way down the steps. And this is the beginning of a little bit of history, because obviously the first state visit of the Trump administration, which is a big honour for Macron, isn't it, Mark?
Of course it is. But again, it's not the first state visit, because Abe, of course, from Japan was just there last week.
Excuse me.
So the first state dinner. But that is a big thing, because the dinner, of course, is much more formal and a much more honored occasion than just a state visit.
Okay, so
And
one
the place.
nil to you on protocol. I got that right. Thank you very much indeed.
No, but the place of the dinner is also interesting. I mean,
is.
there have only been 2 visits to Mount Vernon. One was during the Kennedy administration, and the only recent one was George W. Bush hosting the French president, Sarkozy, in 2007.
Let me bring in John Christopher Bois, who now has some technical issues worked out. I understand there's a problem with sound. So, John Christopher, I will try to speak clearly and succinctly and ask you to give your comments on perhaps what you've been hearing, but also on what you're expecting to happen between Trump and Macron.
Great to see you and great to be on your show. As you can hear, the White House is under some kind of construction behind me. And the tornado that's been holding off till tomorrow looks like it's happening now, but I'm happy to be here. I think that this is a very big deal for Donald Trump. I don't know if he really knows how important the relationship with France is and how long it's gone on. Theoretically, he's not a great student of history. But I will say this about Trump. He's a master of show business, and he's a master of stage design. And he, unfortunately, is bringing Monsieur le Président into the White House and for 3 days of an extravaganza, and I'm afraid he's kind of using him as one of his characters in Celebrity Apprentice. And I think that's unfortunate for Monsieur Macron, because he's a good guy. I think he has good popularity in France. He also mentioned that he kept Trump to keep involved in Syria, and Trump said no, he didn't. He was going to do it on his own. I think he's a good balancing act. We have a lot of respect for the French. you know, liberté, égalité, fraternité. But here's the question. Why are there no Democrats invited to the state dinner tomorrow night?
There are.
That,
there
to
are.
me, is very, very interesting.
There are.
No, they're not.
Yes, they are. Governor
Who is
Edwards
invited?
from Louisiana is invited, and he's a Democrat, sir. I'm
Just
sorry,
one.
but you're incorrect.
Oh, they revised it. They must have heard my voice.
He has,
because there wasn't any
he's
as
been
of
invited for
yesterday.
over a month,
No,
sir. Yes.
No, that's not true, sir. I don't know who you are, but you're wrong. I also will tell
Paul,
you
Governor
that
Edwards
Mr.
from
Trump,
Republicans abroad.
Not abroad.
Mr.
Republicans
Now you're-
Overseas, sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead,
I
John
wanted
Christopher,
to say
speak. Go
this.
ahead.
And I want to defend Macron.
John Christopher, go ahead.
I'm having a very difficult time. May I speak?
Yes, please. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, I'll be 30 seconds. Monsieur Macron is really bailing out this president because when Trump is in trouble, he needs to change the subject and distract. And what he's doing now to get away from the fact that his lawyer may flip on him, that the special counsel Mueller is closing in very closely, and that he's really, really having a very difficult time maintaining some sort of normalcy in that executive mansion behind me. So I think this is a good distraction. I think it's a good move, and I don't know how many of your people know that Angela Merkel is coming on Friday. But this is the first state dinner, and it took the president a year and a half to have a state dinner and to really roll out the carpet. But he's not having many Democrats. Now you're saying he's having one Democrat, and he certainly is not inviting any major people from the media, from the press, etc., as is tradition at this White House.
John Christopher, thank you very much indeed for now. We'll try to sort out the communications with you to make it a little bit more effective and more comfortable for you as soon as we possibly can. Let me bring in Anne Desine to talk about what John Christopher was saying about Macron. He's been used in some way to kind of be a smokescreen for other problems Trump has got.
I think we can reassure everybody that Monsieur Macron, President Macron, can defend himself. I mean, when we listened to the interview on Fox News, he was very clear that, you know, about the handshake, that he studied the way that Prime Minister Abiy was caught by President Trump, and he decided this would not happen to him. So I think he's doing okay. He has also studied the environment, and I think he's very sincere in trying to make progress on the different fronts that we mentioned. And I agree, for him it's very important, the fact that he's the voice of Europe. We have to remember that during the Obama presidency, Obama would telephone Angela Merkel every week. And France, of course, we had not the best president in the world, but France had disappeared from the international scene. So now France is back, and Macron, you know, he speaks fairly good English, especially for a French president. If we compare to the previous ones, he can communicate his ideas, and he has strong ideas. So I think he should be doing okay, and I'm not too afraid and worried that he's going to be used.
And if it's a distraction, it's not going to last very long as a distraction in any case. So
and again, when Macron was asked about all this, the lawyers, the trouble, he said, well, this is not my problem. President Trump has been elected by the American people, end of the story. And when, again, the question was, do you sometimes think whether he's going to finish his term? And again, Macron, very bright, said, well, this is not my problem.
They're playing the Star-Spangled Banner. Let's bring Mark back in for your anthem, sir. In terms of what we're seeing here now, how will this be viewed by the US public?
I think quite well. I mean, I think it's always very nice when the French president is respectful to the American president, and we haven't always seen that sometimes. So I think this is a very nice occasion. It's historically oriented, as we said before. I think this is a great occasion, and it's just a way to remind the people, American and French people, that our friendship is stronger than our differences.
And that's the least the White House can do, because when Donald Trump came to France, the president of France, filled his eyes with French history, French monuments, military parade.
Bastille Day is impressive, whether you're for it or against it. It's impressive.
I'm sure that I think it was a good idea that the White House, I'm not sure it was Donald Trump, who in fact doesn't know very much history. I think it was a good idea for the White House to bring him
You've laughed twice at that one.
I let it go twice, but I mean, this idea he doesn't know history.
He doesn't. He's completely devoid of any serious historic knowledge.
Wait, have you met the guy? I mean,
I don't have to meet him. I listen to him.
You do have to. Stop watching CNN. Watch France 24.
Okay.
Well, I wouldn't disagree with that. We're expecting Emmanuel Macron to speak right now, and we are going to listen.
We're very, very happy and honored to be here with my wife Brigitte at the invitation of President Trump and Melania. This state visit is very important for our people and very important for us. We will have the opportunity of several discussions with President Trump this evening at Mount Vernon, tomorrow at the White House. I will deliver a speech at your Congress on Wednesday. And during the state visit, we will have the opportunity to discuss a lot of bilateral issues and to discuss about our security, about trade, and a lot of multilateral issues very important for our countries and beyond our two countries. This is a great honor, and I think a very important state visit, given the moment of our current environment. Je vais maintenant dire quelques mots en français pour redire combien cette visite est importante à nos yeux et combien je suis honoré avec mon épouse de répondre à l'invitation.
A little taste of what's going on there at the airbase. We're taking a very short break and we'll be back with part 2 of the debate. After that, stay with us. Time now for part 2 of the France 24 debate. We're debating the issues regarding Donald Trump and Emmanuel Macron meeting in the US. It's the first state dinner, Mark.
That's right. Yeah.
First state dinner. That's the honour rolled out to the Macrons as they arrived. They've just landed at the airbase and soon to meet up with Donald Trump. That's the car that will take them to meet them. The dinner tonight at George Washington's residence. There are lots of symbols connected with that. The connection between France and the US and the fight for the independence back in 1776.
Well, that was the...
Your history is good.
I dragged that one from the depths. You could tell, couldn't you? I was really hesitating. 1492 was Columbus, of course.
or else we would have British passports. Perhaps.
Darn!
Wisely.
Don't let him make you nervous with that history talk.
There's lots of symbolism. Before we move on to discuss the bigger issues such as Iran, trade, climate, and Syria, let's take a listen to how some American people have reacted to the idea that Emmanuel Macron is the special guest. Let's hear what they were saying outside the White House a little earlier.
Do you know this man?
No, but he's handsome.
Do I know that man? Jean
Macron.
Macron. Yeah.
Not much. I think I read something about the French people not being very happy with him right now, but I don't remember why.
It's a bit of fun. I've done Vox Pops. You can slant them either way. You could, it's one of those things. But it's interesting that maybe the US public don't quite know who he is.
No, but in general, let's be honest, Americans don't follow French politics, right? It's true that the French follow American politics because in some sense it's necessary, it's a superpower. What happens in the United States is important for the rest of the world. However, I would say that Americans, if they don't follow what happens at the Élysée, do find it important what's happening at Chanel or Dior. So in that sense,
so
France
there are those
has
issues.
Important cultural influence on the world, yes.
The people in the UK are just as nombriliste is the word in French, isn't it? Looking at their belly buttons rather than outwards is the way to put it. And it's usually a very derogatory statement, so I'm not going to go down that channel any further. Let's discuss some of the more serious issues that may be on the table at the private dinner, even from then. And let's start with Syria, which is obviously an area where Donald Trump wants to take the troops out. Emmanuel Macron wants him to keep the troops in. So, Anne, do you feel there'll be any movement on that?
Well, first of all, many people noticed that even though he say we managed to convince Macron, the French press say he managed. So, and I think that was not very wise because we know that when President Trump thinks that he may be manipulated or may be seen as being influenced, he tends to take the other decision. It's difficult to see how much impact Emmanuel Macron will have. I think he was quite good in the Fox News interviews because he said, if we leave, we are leaving the field for Iran. And we know that Donald Trump hates Iran, personally, plus because of his diplomatic choices, you cannot choose Israel and the Saudis and be in favor of Iran. So it's going to also depend on his delegation. So there is Bolton, there's Mike Pompeo, but there's General Mattis. So tomorrow there's a meeting of both presidents, and then there is a meeting with the extended teams. And I guess the outcome will depend on how the discussion goes during that first meeting and then the second meeting.
And let me just read out a tweet that's coming from a viewer. No good can come of these meetings for the world, especially for the Middle East. Both are either bombing other countries or supporting and supplying arms for killing innocent people. What good can we expect? It is a point of view. Thank you for your point of view. Please send in more, because obviously we can illuminate the debate a little bit further. Stephen, sorry.
No. Donald Trump impulsively said that he was going to pull the troops out of Syria. And as usual, we had to wait for the next day to get a reinterpretation, a reframing of that when the generals and the National Security Council and the White House said, not quite. So I think we cannot say, and I think it's wise that you said this, and that it was the French president who weighed in and changed the opinion of the American president. And it's typical. In this sense, Donald Trump is inaudible. He tweets something, he said something, and we have to wait the next day for the interpretation. We have to wait for institutions to weigh in and reframe what the president has said. And that's good. It's good that institutions have the word to say. We know that when Donald Trump is reading from the teleprompter, it's institutions that are speaking through Donald Trump. When he's impulsive and off the cuff, we know that he's improvising, and that we have to wait for the next day to hear what the policy most likely is going to be. To that extent, the impulsive Donald Trump is inaudible.
We are hoping that he tweets and we get some of those impulsive statements that might come through here. Please, hashtag F24debate, Mr. Trump, if you're watching. Mark Porter from Republicans Overseas. In terms of Macron whispering in his ear, talking about Syria, talking about the issues, do you think this is going to edge away, change things, shape him in some way, push him towards a different kind of conclusion?
Certainly influence, but this idea that Trump is impulsive is a misinterpretation. Trump, in fact...
Given the tweets and everything.
But the idea is tweets, and this is what I have to explain to quite a lot of important people in Europe, is that when this president speaks, it's not policy. And that has been tradition before, but it's not required. When Trump speaks, what he is saying is, in fact, a negotiating position. So you have to understand this about how Trump organizes everything about his life and always has. A lot of people can't really see through this and interpret it as impulsiveness, but in fact, that's not really what it is.
With whom is he negotiating then? With his own White House, with the institutions of the United States, with other... I mean,
well, he's not going to tell you that now, is he?
Come on,
the idea here, but seriously, this idea that
I'm being serious.
Everyone is saying that it's impulsive, you're missing the point. Look at North Korea, for example.
You're saying it's impulsive, but it's a negotiating tactic.
He has always said that he would not tell in advance, and here he's telling everybody we are leaving Syria, and the next thing we have a chemical attack. And it could be interpreted as because the U.S. is signaling their intention to leave.
It's not a signal. This is what I'm trying to explain, that the way that Trump communicates is different than the way that previous presidents have.
Oh, yes, we've seen that.
We can agree
exactly
on that.
Right. And if you don't understand the difference and can't see the difference, that's going to cause a lot of trouble.
Are you comfortable? Are you comfortable, Mark, with how he tweets?
I'm always comfortable.
What he tweets. You look comfortable.
I'm here.
Nice try, but I'm going to pin you down on that one. Are you happy then with how uncomfortable with the things he tweets about, the things he says? Because some of the things he's come out with via Twitter have been fairly outrageous, haven't they?
But it's the same idea with tweets, for example. This idea of tweet is not official policy that's coming out of his mouth.
But it's still the president speaking, isn't it?
The president, look, the world has changed. I mean, we're now in the world of tweet. We have to understand that if you're doing an analysis from CNN, then you're actually missing how the world has changed, and the American people understand this. And also, surprisingly enough, a lot of heads of state understand this now. So this idea that now people are getting comfortable with a new way of communication, this is how it is, and if you don't keep up with the times, you're going to be left behind.
If what the president tweets is not policy, the Oval Office is empty.
No,
come on.
No, that's... No, wait. Just one statement. Come on, we can go back and say that everything that a president says is not always policy anyway. But this idea, seriously, of looking at tweets in terms of putting them all together as a mosaic rather than one particular tweet that's taken out of context.
So what is his policy on Syria? Please tell us, because we don't understand. What is Mr. Trump's policy on Syria? Do you know? If
well, today, what might be today or
I mean,
tomorrow?
this minute.
Oh, this minute.
This minute. If you decipher the tweet, so what's your conclusion? What is he going to do?
I'm not an analyst, and I'm certainly not going to speak on the behalf of the State Department. But what I'm trying to tell you is, if you look at things differently, you can see deeper.
Okay.
Let's bring in John Christopher Bua, who I hope is still with us in Washington. I hope he's been following what we've been saying.
Yes, I am.
Excellent. Go ahead, sir. Over to you.
I've been holding on. I've been holding on with bated breath. I don't know who's speaking when, but if you ask me a question, I'll do my darndest to answer it, Mark, to you and to your guests, if they let me finish. Because if they speak, then I don't know how to answer. So shoot, and I'll follow through.
There is a large delay which is hindering you too. So I will ask people to let you finish with all honesty and with all courtesy. John Christopher, the issue that I wanted illuminating by Mark here was Donald Trump's tweeting. And Mark Porter of Republicans Overseas is comfortable with how Trump uses Twitter. I wonder what your perception of that is.
Well, the fact is, if he does use Twitter, and we've been told as a White House correspondent in the briefing room that his tweets are in fact official statements from the president. Now, a lot of his fans, perhaps, and most of the world would prefer if he didn't get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, perhaps on the wrong side of the bed, and start trashing everybody with the most vulgar forms of the language, that it really diminishes the kinds of presidencies we've known. And I've been alive since Ike. And I remember my parents telling me about Roosevelt, and I saw JFK and Ronald Reagan. These were eloquent people who we were proud to be our president. And we're looking at this man with these atrocious attacks, ad hominem attacks on members of his cabinet. I think we are really losing. Not that most of the American people didn't have much faith in this president, but now they are really losing faith. And we hope, and Trump is hoping, that Monsieur Macron, an honorable Frenchman, will try to pull him out of the swamp that he's found himself in, and maybe this distraction will keep the minds of the American people off Stormy Daniels for a few days.
John Christopher Bua, thank you very much indeed. We'll bring the panel back in here in the studio, starting off with the latest tweet we've got coming through. Trump to host French President Macron at George Washington's Mount Vernon home. Here's a Washington quote for Mr. Macron to ponder, and this is the quote: "Associate with men of good quality if you esteem your reputation, for it is better to be alone than in bad company." Anne.
Ah, come on. And I see the name doesn't...
It's a viewpoint.
Yeah, but first of all, although I'm not very happy with the tweets, I would not necessarily describe Mr. Trump as bad company. And if we take the French point of view, there is no choice. I mean, there is no way a French president, whoever is president on the other side, can decide we have no relationships with the U.S.
Is he there as a friend or as a president? He's there as a president, isn't he? It's about what he can get. It's about what he can influence. Yeah,
how they can negotiate, how he can push his messages, multilateralism, etc. And the fact that even though the world has changed, even though some people say that the U.S. is a power by default, this and that, I mean, the world is always better if the U.S. is still involved, less than before, that's for sure. The U.S. cannot solve every problem and all the problems in the world, but when they are somewhat involved, the outcome is usually less bad than it could have been.
If we didn't have the US, there would be a lot more problems around the world unsolved. Yeah. And some people say there would be fewer problems around the world. I suppose it depends on your political standpoint, doesn't it? And I'm not taking sides either way. Can we move on to Iran? Because obviously Macron telling Fox News, Mark, that there's no plan B. Mm-hmm. How is Donald Trump going to take that?
Well, first of all, I don't know. I don't speak on behalf of the president.
Sure.
The idea that treaties are ratified by the Senate, which is interesting that Macron will be speaking in front of a joint session of Congress also. So he's not just speaking to the president, he's also speaking to the Senate, and he will be visiting other representatives as well. So it's important to remember that in the United States, it's not the president that makes a decision. So I know we're going to talk about climate change later, but our previous president, for example, signed a treaty, well, he signed a document that wasn't a treaty because it wasn't ratified by the Senate. So there is no walking back on this idea of climate change because it never legally was a treaty in the first place. So these are complexities that I think that Macron understands well, or he.
No problem. He knows
I
that.
think so. It appears so, which is quite interesting because it didn't appear that way in the past in France, where people were blaming the president for certain things, when in fact that's not really completely under his authority.
So the Paris Climate Accord, the US was never really in it. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, yes, it was. But it wasn't a treaty. It was an executive agreement,
yes.
because President Obama knew that he could not get the two-thirds majority he needed to pass a treaty, so he went around the Senate, made an executive agreement, and that weakened it. And that's why the next president, Donald Trump, could just movement of a pen undo an executive
Trump
agreement.
doesn't like the climate accord, and he described the Iran deal, the Iran nuclear deal, as the worst deal ever.
That's right.
I mean,
he's done that consistently.
So,
But in some ways,
the deals that he looks at and say this doesn't really work, and of course it's very difficult to negotiate any kind of agreement. So as you said correctly, that the idea of an executive order
agreement for
the executive agreement. Sorry, yes. In this case, it was an executive agreement. Is easily replaced by the next executive, who is the president, President Trump.
Yes, but Iran is a little different because it's not bilateral. There are European countries. And even if the agreement is not perfect, which it is not, because some subjects are left out, there would be the possibility that those subjects could be added if President Macron convinces President Trump to stay in the agreement another 3 months, which would give room for negotiations, maybe not negotiations, that would be difficult, but additions to the agreement, and for instance, the ballistic part of the
is the Iran deal going to survive? That's the issue, isn't it?
There is quite significant agreement between France and the United States on Iran. There is agreement between France and the United States that Iranian missiles are a problem, that a certain Iranian aggressivity in the region is a problem, that the support of terrorism by Iran is a problem. However, the French policy is that there's a preference for keeping this accord, the Iranian accord, and not renegotiating it, perhaps in the future bringing up these other topics to negotiate those as well. So even though more specifically the French and even the American generals want to maintain the joint, what's it called? Yeah, the joint comprehensive agreement. Even though, the generals want that, there is still a convergence of interest between France and the United States on these other issues: Iranian behavior, missiles, and the support of terrorism.
Jean-Christophe Bouet, this will be our final word from you because of time and because of the technical issues we've got. So, Jean-Christophe, I hope you can hear me, and we can see, and I think we can hear you. Iran. Macron is saying that there's no plan B on Fox News. How do you feel that this will go with Donald Trump in their after-dinner meeting tonight?
I don't know if he really understands what the situation is in Iran. He has no Secretary of State, and his CIA director is now trying to be confirmed Secretary of State. And we have a problem there because Mr. Pompeo said that he served in the Gulf War, and he never has. So I don't really know. When people ask, what does Trump think, we have to say, we don't know. We really don't know what he's doing. That's the question we have in America. And the American electorate, especially the youth, is very, very concerned. So I can't answer that question because I don't know what goes on inside his mind.
Jean-Christophe Bouet, thank you very much indeed. Jean-Christophe Bouet there from Talk Media, White House correspondent. Thank you so very much indeed. We have another tweet coming through, just to sort of show people are watching and want your opinions about these things. Macron trying to take the European leadership from Merkel. Merkel going to Washington on Friday. Is this Macron really taking the leadership of Europe, do you think?
But vis-a-vis the United States, I think it's true.
Yeah.
Macron is taking the
it's
leadership.
not taking, because Angela Merkel was absent. I mean, for several months she was not to be talked to. And because President Trump has a problem with women, he's not very happy. Yes, I mean, discussing, he likes beautiful women. But he can talk better with a male president, Macron. So I don't think Macron is trying to take his place. But since there is nobody to occupy the place, he's all too happy to take the place. I think there's also a division of labor. We could think that maybe what they're going to focus on during the 3 days visit, state visit and state dinner, etc., is Iran, Syria, etc. And maybe Angela Merkel is going to focus on the tariffs on Friday. And that could be a way, because she's suffering more than France from the tariffs if they were not to be, if the exemption was not to be made permanent. And because, I mean, not everything can be negotiated at the same time, I think that that could be that division.
So tariffs on steel and aluminium,
Yeah.
some people saying Donald Trump starting his own trade war.
Yeah.
Well, he's negotiating. I mean, this is essentially with China also. So we can't just think about Europe and the United States. It is in a larger context.
Yeah, but China is 2% of the market for steel and aluminum.
We have temporary exemptions. We'll have to see if they're going to
exactly.
be made permanent. It's very likely that they're going to be extended. So, you know, because it hurts American businesses and American industries as well.
Yes,
I was going to say, it feels like a spectacular own goal, doesn't it, the whole thing?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, it's also interesting about Merkel. She flew into Paris right before Trump did, also back in the summer. So it's interesting to see, are Merkel and Macron working together? Is she coaching him? What is going on here? That's quite an interesting question.
Indeed. We've just had a big meeting between Merkel and Macron, of course, in Berlin. I'm sure what you've been talking about actually was going on. I'm sure that's the way it works. In terms of climate, let's just come back to that for before we end this program. In terms of the climate situation, do you see any movement, Stephen, on what we're in?
In any case, Trump signed a removal of the United States from the climate accord. It doesn't take effect until a few days after the next presidential election. So he started the process of removing the United States from the climate agreement. We'll have to see if the next president, if that's a Democrat, will in fact decide that he will keep the United States in that agreement, that accord. So,
but there's the level of the agreement, but there's also everything that's going on in the states, in the cities, in companies that really think that global warming is harmful, and they're taking measures. So it remains to be seen whether the objectives will be kept, because it's more difficult when there is no impetus at the federal level, when there is no money distributed by the Environmental Protection Agency, and where there is the deregulation by Mr. Scott Pruitt, who is in deep trouble, he too, for lots of not very ethical
But the other
behavior.
issue here is also China and India. If they signed this agreement, and Trump has a point here, if climate change is really going to be addressed, we need everyone to do it, not just certain people. So this is one of the biggest points in the election back in 2016 that really diffused the whole climate change issue in the election.
that was the fundamental weakness of the agreement anyhow.
Absolutely.
So keeping everybody in. And there is nothing binding in it. Well, states can decide themselves what sort of binding measures they will impose on themselves. But apart from that, it's, you know, the accord was a French diplomatic success, but it came down to the lowest common denominator, which means that usually it doesn't mean very much in the longer term.
Thank you very much.
If we look at Kyoto, for example, that would fall into.
Stay with us, because Media Watch is coming up now.